Good morning. Welcome to our little devotional time this week. I hope you have had a great week and you've enjoyed the beautiful spring weather. Today I want us to look at Psalm 121. Psalm 120 to 134 are called Psalms of Ascent. These psalms were sung as hymns as pilgrims went up to Jerusalem for the sacred feast. And as you will remember, the men were supposed to do that three times a year. This passage is one today, as we look at 121, was one of my mom's very favorites, and often she would quote these verses. But I remember in 2014 when our team went to Tajikistan and Kazakhstan, as we arrived at the retreat center for the Tajikistan conference with our women, and we looked up behind that retreat center, there were those huge mountains. And I remember looking at one of the team members and saying, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. Because for me, it was a visual reminder of what David would have seen. And so in Psalm 120, David is addressing the suffering of the godly. And he prays for deliverance from enemies. He prays that the persecutors would be stopped. And his prayer mirrors the prayers of godly people throughout the generations. But he is still talking about suffering, but in Psalm 121, he highlights God as Israel's keeper and as his preserver. And he never fails his own. God never fails his own. And that's true of you and me as well. And so let's look at these. It's a short psalm, just 8 verses, but let's look at these verses. Verses 1 and 2. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. David is making God the focus of his help by looking to those mountains surrounding Jerusalem, particularly Mount Moriah, which was the site of the temple and the focal point of God's abiding, manifest presence on the earth. He says, I will lift up my eyes unto the hills. How often is the Lord's power illustrated by creation? If God had the power to create everything we see in the heavens and the earth, he has power to defend his people. Remember when Daniel was in captivity and he was facing all of the issues? What did he do? He continued to pray 3 times a day facing Jerusalem. These men recognized and knew God was omnipresent. He wasn't restricted to one place, but from him they would receive help. So how does David describe this? In verses 3 and 4, he says, He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Just as God will not allow the foot of the individual who trusts in him to slip, to be moved, to be shaken, neither was he going to allow Israel to be out of his sight. The Lord doesn't slumber, sleep. He's always on guard. He's always keeping watch. And that is a military term. Think of a sentinel, a guard, vigilant, watching, not asleep as he does his job. But the repetition of that verb, slumber nor sleep, emphasizes God's awareness of his people and the threats that they face. He is committed to protect them to the end. So, on those days when I and when you feel overwhelmed, we need to remember God doesn't sleep. He doesn't slumber. And what's happening in my life is not a surprise to him. So then look how David kind of delineates this in verses 5 to 8. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is the shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. So you think about the extent of God's guarding and protecting Israel. It's twofold. It's physical and it's spiritual. Physically, he cares for us night and day. And David mentions he's the shade on the right hand. The sun doesn't smite him by day, nor the moon by night. Total care. Total care. But spiritually, he keeps our souls. And this implies both our material body as well as our immaterial soul. But I love verse 8, where all of his keeping is summed up. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and coming in. That's our daily lives. From this time forth and even forevermore. That indicates his keeping throughout life and even into eternity. What an encouragement to you and me as we journey toward heaven, serving until he calls us home. So we, like David, have to keep our focus on God. We have to know that our times are in his hands. Our today has already passed through his hand, as will our tomorrow and every day thereafter. What mercy, what love, and what grace. I hope you have a great week.